All right, so this week we've got our hands on the 2022 Lexus UX250h. And it particularly appeals to buyers who want a bit of luxury, is easy to drive, and is fuel efficient. So if you're out on the road a lot, or say for example, you're a contractor or consultant who needs to drive around a lot to meet a lot of different clients throughout the day, this just might be the perfect fit. Now, what is the UX250h? Well, it's a subcompact crossover SUV. So it's going to be a bit smaller in size compared to your more conventional 5-passenger crossover, similar to that of the Mazda CX-5 or Hyundai Sonata. It's also going to sit lower to the ground, so it's going to give you a more sportier and fun driving experience, all while retaining somewhat of a crossover SUV feel. And after all, it's a Lexus, so you're going to get a fair share of luxury treatment, but more importantly, a very, very fuel-efficient powertrain, which is definitely a very important aspect to consider, especially with how expensive gas prices are nowadays. Now, before we get into the details of the full review of the UX250h, I want to talk about Lexus as a brand. What is their competing edge, and what do they do better than others? Well, first of all, you're typically not going to see the latest and greatest tech, innovation, or styling with Lexus vehicle in general. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. What I'm trying to get at is, instead of jumping onto the fast fashion bandwagon, designers and engineers at Lexus have more time to continue the refinement and improvement of their existing technology. And that, in my opinion, is probably the fundamental reason as to why not only the Lexus and Toyota hybrid powertrain is the most fuel efficient, but probably the most reliable powertrains out there. And secondly, I really think that Lexus has one of the most comfortable cabin space in the entire luxury segment, which we'll go over a lot more in detail, but that's just something that I really want to point out to you guys. All right, so let's talk about the powertrain. Underneath the hood, you're not really going to see anything out of this world or some crazy alien technology or anything like that, no. It's a Lexus and Toyota hybrid powertrain. And it's been around for a very long time, probably close to 20 years if you consider when the first Prius came out. But despite the fact, that's becoming very appealing because it's so fuel efficient. It gets close to 40 miles per gallon on both city and highway drive cycle, which is remarkable. A typical V6 engine will get you low 23 miles per gallon, whereas a 4-cylinder non-hybrid engine is going to give you around low to mid 30 miles per gallon. Considering how fuel efficient this powertrain is, and also the fact that it's so reliable, rarely do you ever hear about the Lexus or Toyota hybrid powertrains breaking down. It's going to save you a lot of money in the long run because it's more cheaper to fill up and you're going to spend less time fixing it, which is going to save you a lot of money, and it's definitely something I would definitely consider because of how broke I am from the pandemic inflation. So I also want to talk to you about, how does a hybrid powertrain work? Why is it so fuel efficient? Well, the reason for that is it's got 3 components instead of just one. It's got a combustion engine, a 2.0 liter 4-cylinder engine, as well as a lithium-ion battery pack and an electric motor. So every time you decelerate, the electric motor is going to recapture some of that regenerative electrical energy and store that into the lithium-ion battery pack, such that once you accelerate again, the electric motors are going to draw power from the lithium-ion battery pack to provide you additional torque assist. So with that information out of the way, let's talk about what the UX250h has to offer. Well, the UX250h comes standard with all-wheel drive. So that's going to be beneficial because it's going to give you a bit of extra traction in slippery and wet conditions, which is particularly useful, especially in Canada where we have 4 seasons weather. Now, in the US, typically speaking, you're going to get more options, in particularly the UX200, which is a front-wheel drive variant. It's going to get the same combustion engine, a 2.0 liter 4-cylinder engine, but you're also going to get less horsepower. You're only going to get 169 horsepower with the front-wheel drive variant, as opposed to the hybrid powertrain that we have here that comes with 181 horsepower. Now, if you get the F Sport trim, it's also going to come with sport-tuned suspensions. So it's going to give you a more nimble and sportier driving experience, especially around cornering. All right, so let's talk about the interior of the Lexus UX250h, which in my opinion, I think is the highest point of this vehicle. First of all, the F Sport trim that we have here comes with this perforated Nulux synthetic leather material. It's a dimpled pattern, which makes it feel really, really nice to the touch, and it's got the same materials on the steering wheel, the shifter, and especially these F Sport bolstered bucket seats. I really like these seats. They are power adjustable, and they also have a lot of lateral support. And more importantly and interestingly, these seats are also from the Lexus RC350 Sports Coupe, which is a much higher and more luxurious vehicle in the Lexus lineup. So what I'm trying to say is that, typically speaking, with bucket seats with a lot of lateral support, it's going to typically feel really tight. But that's definitely not the case with these F Sport bolstered seats. You know, they're both really, really comfortable and have exceptional lateral support as well, which is really going to help you hold into your seats when you're cornering, which is the reason why you have really good lateral support in these seats. Now, the instrument cluster is also one of my favorite pieces in this car. The history behind it is that it's an all LCD digital display that's also trickled down from the Lexus LFA supercar, which I know it's really old. You know, it's probably like maybe 10, 15 years old, but nevertheless, it's really cool to be able to see the highest level of tech innovation from supercars trickle down into consumer cars that we're driving here and be able to afford for regular people like myself. So what do we have here? It's an 8-inch multi-function LCD display that has two different drive modes. You can switch between a more driver-focused LCD display that shows you more limited information such as the speedometer, the engine temperature, as well as the fuel gauge. Or you can switch to a more informative display that has different menus. For example, you can show your AM, FM, or XM radio settings, or as well as your tire pressure or other settings like that. The infotainment system, it's a 10.3-inch display, non-touchscreen. It's all manipulated by this haptic feedback trackpad style, which a lot of people hate. If you read a lot of reviews, there's a lot of hate on this style of trackpad, but in my opinion, it's not really that bad. You kind of get used to it, and how that works is it snaps into different menu GUIs or boxes, and it has like a little haptic feedback motor that vibrates slightly to indicate that you've snapped onto each menu. It's fairly responsive. You've got a few shortcut buttons which helps navigate through the menus. You got a maps, a home button, as well as a previous button for the previous menu. So if you only had this trackpad, I would admit, you know, it's actually a little bit difficult to use, but fortunately you also have an additional shortcut, I don't know what you call this, Mad Catz button, I don't know, whatever you call it, but it's very, very useful because it's got additional buttons and dials that you can tune the radio settings as well as the volume or switch between different media modes. So it's additional buttons for shortcuts to more easily access different menus and configurations on this 10.3-inch infotainment touchscreen. And again, you know, with Lexus, you're not really going to see the latest and greatest styling features. So it's actually not that bad, despite the fact that it's fairly old, but it's still very, very easy and crisp to read. I really like the color scheme. It's got a kind of a black and moonlit scheme, very, very similar to the Mazda design approach. So if you really like the Mazda design, you're really gonna like the Lexus interior and the whole design scheme, because it's gonna essentially have the same design methodologies with a more upscaled and luxury interior cabin space and treatment as well. And of course, you've got your classical analog clock, which is really nice. And you've also got various materials throughout the interior cabin space that kind of gives you that full Lexus luxury treatment. For example, this really nice anodized black aluminum finish. You've also got these dedicated toggle buttons to turn on and off different settings on the climate controls. And I really like this blue anodized push button ignition start switch. So as crazy as it sounds, it's still got a CD player, which I will admit not a lot of people will use, but they've kept it anyways because, you know, I really think that Lexus has a really good audio sound system, and to really be able to push the audio quality up to the limits and what the sound system is capable of, that's probably the reason why they kept a CD player, which I personally would actually really like as well if I was actually a music lover. Now down here, you've also got a dedicated climate controls for ventilated seats, which is really nice. If it's really hot outside, there are fans running behind these F Sport bucket seats, which keeps your back cool and prevents it from sweating, which is kind of gets really gross in the summer. You've also got heated seats, 3 levels, as well as heated steering. And it's also got dual climate controls. So with the UX250h, you're going to be able to independently control the temperature between your driver and the passenger as well, which is really nice. And that also comes standard on the UX250h. Down here, you've got a small cubby hole for wireless smartphone charging, as well as a dedicated 12-volt, 120-watt charger here. I don't particularly like this adapter style. I think it's kind of dated, and I think they probably should have just straight up used a USB outlet. But nevertheless, you can just get an adapter from a 12-volt outlet to a USB conversion. You've got 2 cup holders, as well as a really nice gear shifter. You can also switch it into sequential and shift mode through these paddle shifters, or using these gear shifters to shift up and down. And particularly the sequential shift mode, I don't think it's really provides much value because the UX250h isn't really a performance-oriented car, so it's going to be a bit slow to respond to manual shifting. But nevertheless, if you want a bit more driving engagement, it's there if you want to use it. Down here, you've also got a EV mode button. So if your lithium-ion battery pack is charged fully, you can switch into pure EV mode of, I believe, up to around 15 kilometers per hour. So for example, if you're driving in a parking lot or in a back alley or in low speed conditions, you can switch to EV mode for pure EV driving, meaning the combustion engine is completely shut off. You're running on pure electricity. And you've also got park and auto hold assist, which is really nice. Sometimes if you're at a stoplight, you can engage this auto hold. So meaning you can actually let go of the brake pedals because the system will automatically apply the brakes for you at a stoplight. And once you press on the accelerator pedal again, the system is smart enough to disengage your brakes. And in the back, you've also got a very small cargo compartment here, as well as 2 USB charge ports for Android Auto and Apple CarPlay support on the infotainment system, as well as a dedicated auxiliary audio port. So that's also particularly useful if you have a dedicated high quality audio player. You can plug that straight in, or of course you can use the CD player, which is going to give you really good sound quality and exceptional listening experience. Now, if you read reviews online, you'll typically hear, for example, on Car and Driver, that the UX250h in general are pretty boring cars to drive. There's not a lot of power, and to be fair, they are right, but I don't really think that's a fair thing to really say. After all, the UX250h isn't really designed to be a high performance car, and it's not always a good thing. For example, don't get me wrong, the cars, like high performance cars like BMW, are exceptionally fun cars to drive with on-demand big horsepower and exceptional cornering and handling. But what you'll notice about those cars is that it'll definitely put a physical and a mental toll on you, especially on long drives. So that's really where the UX250h really benefits from. You can drive it for a very long period of time, and you're not really going to feel as tired as well. So, I still remember when I drove the Lexus RC350, people are going to say, it's not really the highest performing car. There are better cars out there in the sports department, which, is somewhat true. But what Lexus really does really well is that they're able to develop a car that's really comfortable and easy to drive for long periods of time. Now, the UX250h also comes with a heads-up display that's optional. I believe it's an extra $850 or so. Typically speaking, a lot of cars, it actually is really useful. It shows you lane departure. If you're like swerving out of the lane, it's got lane departure detection, as well as, of course, your speedometer and your hybrid power, instantaneous power consumption. I think it helps to some extent, but I can probably live without it because, the F Sport bolster bucket seats actually sit pretty low to the ground, so you're not always focused on the heads-up display anyways. And the instrument cluster on the UX250h is actually really nice already, so I don't really need, an extra heads-up display for this particular car. But overall, it's very, very easy to drive. That's what I really personally love about Lexus vehicles in general. It's very quiet. You know, there's a bit of obnoxious noise from the CVT transmission. You know, they have kind of a notorious effect of creating kind of somewhat of an obnoxious transmission noise, but it's really, you know, not that bad, especially with how well the cabin space is insulated from exterior cabin noise and the engine noise as well. Overall, you know, I can't stress enough how comfortable these seats are. They are really, really comfortable. I just can't stress that enough. They feel exceptionally sporty and, you know, very, very supportive as well. And I really like this dimpled perforated leather, synthetic leather materials. It's really, really nice to the touch. And of course, you've got a really, really nice audio sound system. It's very high quality, and you know, I think still using the Mark Levinson audio sound system, which is kind of a very iconic and signature audio sound system that really works in tandem really well with the overall Lexus brand. And on top here, of course, you've got a dedicated moonroof that you can tilt up and down or open up entirely. It's not a panoramic sunroof like more, you know, higher luxury vehicles have, but it's still really nice to have overall with an additional moonroof to kind of bring in more fresh air into the cabin space. Another key feature that I really want to note is, you know, remember when I was saying that how Lexus really pays a lot of attention to detail and they really try to improve the overall driving experience? Well, one of those key design features is this wider gap between the side windshield and this apex pillar here. The reason why I say that it's so important is because it really helps look at the corners, especially when you're turning. So for example, if I'm turning on a corner on the left, I can really see exactly where the apex is. So it gives me a much clearer direction as to where the vehicle is driving to, kind of even avoid hitting any obstacles or sidewalk curbs or anything like that. Well, that's my take on the 2022 Lexus UX250h, a subcompact crossover SUV that's got plenty of luxury, is easy to drive, but more importantly is ultra fuel efficient, all within a very reasonable price point. Now the downside to the UX250h, in my opinion, is going to be the limited legroom and cargo capacity. So that's something you're going to have to consider if you plan to grow into this car. But the good news is that I really think that the UX250h will hold its value over time, considering how fuel efficient and reliable the powertrain is, and it's also got a very contemporary and modern styling that's really going to retain its looks and values. Nevertheless, if you enjoyed this review, please do like and subscribe and comment on this video, because I would really appreciate any support I can get. And as always, keep driving, and until next time.